The Gell-Mann amnesia effect. This is Shores Infinity with your host Chris speaking. We've been talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect already, which is basically the people are too stupid to realize that they're stupid. And then there's another interesting effect called the Gell-Mann effect. And in the next video we'll talk about another interesting effect. But first about the Gell-Mann effect, named after Gell-Mann Murray, and the person who came up with the term was the author Michael Crichton. So the Gell-Mann effect is that if you're reading a newspaper article or a magazine article or listening to a news story or podcast or whatever about a topic you know very well, and you realize that what they're talking or writing about is bullshit, that the person who wrote this was probably a journalist who doesn't know the first thing about it, who researched a little bit and then wrote a very superficial article which is basically wrong. You realize that this is bullshit, and then you continue reading in the same magazine or newspaper or listening to the same newscast or podcast or whatever. And then believe what the other articles are telling you about. So although you know that about the subject you are a specialist in, the article is bullshit, somehow an amnesia kicks in, and most people assume that the other articles are correct somehow. This is very interesting, especially within the last few years we saw that cropping up a lot. Even very intelligent and educated people people tend to believe what the media say, what the legacy official public media say and write, although they know from experience that some of the things are not right or in retrospect turned out to be wrong. But there's this belief somehow that is like an amnesia, that the majority of news is somehow correct and is real news, which probably has never been the case. Newspapers want to sell. They don't want to report news or truths. They want to sell copies of their newspaper or have certain quotas of TV coverage. So they want to attract things like the headlines of many newspaper articles. They're just ridiculous. They're just bait. And even in spiritual circles, I've seen this very often, that people still trust the news somehow. In political topics, for example, especially in topics where we don't know much about, or we don't have direct access to information, we tend to trust that there's some truth in what the articles write about. Well, in actual fact, it's all bullshit. Already Nietzsche remarked upon that. He said the journalists, they vomit their gall and then call it newspaper. Or Sri Aurobindo also wrote about it, that he reads the newspaper, but he's very careful to sift out the few kernels of truth that you can find in there. Dates, for example, but not interpretations. Interpretations are usually wrong and there's an agenda behind it. And obviously, newspapers and TV news and so on, they belong to someone, and this someone has an agenda, political agenda, economical agenda they want to push through. So although we know this, especially spiritual people tend to be careful about news, and still they believe what they hear in the news. So the easiest way to circumvent this Gell-Mann amnesia effect is to just not believe 100% of the news. Don't listen to it, don't read it, and if you hear about it, don't believe it. It's even more likely that the exact opposite is true. Okay, that was the Gell-Mann effect. See you soon. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Give the video a thumbs up. Thank you for joining me on Patreon, and thank you for those who have already joined me on Patreon and support this show. Thank you very much.